Hi BookTube, and welcome to a book review video. It is Ben Marcus's latest collection of short stories, Notes from the Fog. This is a second successive collection of short stories, and when I came to it in my unboxing, I did ask the question as to whether his shtick, and I don't mean that pejoratively, I mean that a high literary shtick, whether he was unable to explore it anymore within the framework of a full-length novel. Because his last collection of short stories were very much again on that sort of shtick, which I'll explain what it is later. And here we have a second collection of short stories in a row, and it is different. This is a different or slightly different Ben Marcus, I would say. So what is that original shtick of his? Well, he explores language, not just the sort of surprising word combinations that sort of detonate, they're so surprising they, stop you up short. He explored the functional language in books like The Age of Wire and String and The Flame Alphabet and things like that. And the last book of short stories called Leaving the Sea. The first four stories are fairly conventional, but then the rest of them did exactly the same in shorter form as his novels do. This doesn't do that. This has abandoned, I think, the function, explorations of the function of language, except through the word detonations themselves. I mean, that is still very much in here. And we're lulled, the first story lulls us into a complete false sense of security, because in one respect it's quite conventional. It is a mother and a father who have two kids, and the older son sort of completely rejects any kind of relationship with them as a child, He's very cold to them, he shuts them out. And of course they try all these different sort of, approaches to him, and they, he sees through them. They take him to therapy. With everybody else, he's, sweetness and light. Even with his own younger brother, he's just so sort of adoring and warm. And this just enrages the parents. And it's told from the perspective of the father. But the mother is no more successful at having a relationship with the son, but it shows up the fault lines in the marriage, because they have slightly different takes. Even though they are both exasperated by being rejected, the mother sort of is more willing to give the boy his space and time to grow and maybe come round to them than the father, who feels utterly rejected. And this is a fairly conventional but brilliantly, it's a dagger through the heart of any parent, this story. It's a brilliantly told story, and you think, okay, so he has abandoned the language thing, but then the next couple of stories are just, I enjoyed that one, but the next couple of stories are fantastic. There's one called Precious Precious. There's one called Blueprint for St. Louis, which I think is the strongest story in the whole collection, and then the one after that's called The Grow Light Blues, and those are the three I'm mainly going to talk about. So I think every story in this book is about characters who are alienated and estranged. And they're alienated and estranged from feeling itself. They are unable to reach and grasp feeling. And that is the sort of expressed through the language of the book, this sort of strange word combinations that Marcus uses. But the point is, I think that all the characters, they don't accept this. They fight against it. They grasp, even if they can't, do it coherently, or they're not successful. They don't accept the sort of numbness. They do kick against it. And I think it's a statement on where we are in the modern world and how alienating it is and how repressive of feeling it is. And that runs through virtually every one of these stories in the collection. So there's a story called Blueprint for St. Louis, which is just, from beginning to end is a fantastic story. So terrorist attacks, terrorist atrocities have become, commonplace in America. Mainly bombings, which sort of, destroy an open space and erase the people who are there. And what has grown up is an industry in designing and building memorials for these atrocities. So the story looks at a husband and wife team who own a company that pitches to design these memorials, and it's a meditation on the relationship of space, mankind, architecture, vacuum of space, and erasure, all those sorts of things. And that's sort of built into how they're thinking about, they want to do something different. They want to somehow embody and encapsulate oblivion. But what's really interesting, I think, and this is, absolutely key sort of motif throughout this book, There was really just one more thing to deal with for now, and they had both been dreading it. They had to finally sit down and look at bids from the pharmaceuticals, which were fighting their way onto the proposal, vying to be the providers of the chemical components that every memorial these days was more or less expected to have. A gentle mist to assist the emotional response of visitors and drug them into a torpor of sympathy. Not garment-rending sympathy, but something more dignified. A mood was delivered via fog, discreetly and mildly, with microdoses misting through carefully arranged spouts, the way an outdoor mall in the summer might be air-conditioned. You didn't see it, and you didn't smell it. You strolled through a field or a plaza or a series of dark marble tunnels, whatever, sipping the sorrow-laced air, and when you finally departed, a kind of low-grade catharsis had been triggered. You were bursting with feeling. Big artistic win. And, if you stop to think about it, that's horrific. That people can only feel when they're sprayed with the emotions that they're supposed to feel. It's a complete external artificial thing because they can't summon it from themselves because they're so numbed by this regular occurrence of death and terrorist atrocity. And, I think that's a brilliant story. It's my favourite one in the whole book. But there are a couple of ones around it that are equally strong. So this is called the Grow Light Blues, where a character is in an office environment. There's quite a few of these stories which are, do consider work. Work doesn't get considered in literature much. It's really sort of people thinking and their relationships. I mean, there are books that take place in a workspace. There's K-Pod. There's Apathy, there's the first Joshua Ferris novel, Then Everything Came to an End. They do take place almost exclusively in the workplace. But several of these stories consider the relationship of the workplace and the workers, both within the workplace and without. And in fact, I'm going to jump back. So before I talk about Grow Light Blues, so it's quite hard to organise my thoughts for this. I'm going to read this from the story called Precious Precious, which is a brilliant demonstration of how Marcus has these sort of word explosions. So talk about sex between two work colleagues. Ida went home with Mort that night. She'd survived his mild trespasses a few times, and the embarrassment she'd initially expected over sex with a young hairless engineer never really ignited. Maybe that counted for something. Sometimes at the end of drinking sessions like tonight, each ashamed and regretful to an equal degree, Ida guessed, since they didn't really stoop to disclosure, they stumbled into each other's territory, Little Rascals style, providing a certain service. One day, supposedly, a kind friend could give them what they needed and clean up after, and possibly even flush the shame from their systems as well. But for the time being, they still had to endure the company of other fleshy need machines, human spouters, and little bags of weepery. Mort was younger and softer all around, but Ida didn't mind consorting with him because he was erotically polite and unthreatening. And he devoted most of his fornicational energies confirming that everything was all right, as if each new timid push into her, his face ballooning above her like a parade float, might have suddenly changed the ethical terms of their encounter. Which, Ida thought, who knows, maybe it did. Was it okay? Was she okay? Did this feel right? Did she mind? Was it uncomfortable? Did that feel nice? Would she like something else? Something different? Maybe even a person different from him, which he could possibly try to arrange. Ida pictured Mort on the street, half naked with his sweet baby legs, soliciting civilians to come up to her apartment and make really, really nice. Mort would do that for her, even if it was secretly for him, to gratify some bottomless need to be solicitous and helpful. The desire to please and please and please. It was all a bit selfish when you thought about it. And that sums up, the estrangement which is delivered through language. It's sort of people observing themselves outside of themselves. This is sex, supposedly the most intimate and feeling and passionate activity. And what we get instead through the choice of phrases is they had to endure the company of other fleshy need machines, human spouters and little bags of weepery. I just think, he's one of the best writers of sex there is, because he's not writing about sex at all. He's writing about the chasm between people in sex. But anyway, so returning to the Grow Light Blues. So this is a company who do lots of experimentation. And what they're looking to do, one of the things they're testing is to, whether there's a shortage of food or whatever the reason is, they're basically, or I think it's more to do with time, the time people spend eating. They want to reduce that. And the way they're going to do that, or the way they're testing to do that, is to have people stare at computer screens with certain light, sort of filtering through it all day. And that will give them the nourishment and the nutrition they need. And it's called the Grow Light Blues, literally. But there's a section in here again, it's this theme of, we cannot express emotion. We cannot reach emotion. We're not in touch with emotion. So he joined Mayflower's wearable teams 5 years back and had been whiteboarding applications that tracked emotions, or tried to, so that the world's feelings could finally get accurately logged and mined, and then probably ransomed back to the people who had the feelings in the first place. Using the data they collected, Carl's team had been able to match users' emotion narratives, the plotted vectors of what they felt over the course of days and weeks and years, with those of other users. Maybe even in their own apartment building, certainly in their neighbourhood, unless they lived in the middle of nowhere, or unless their feeling vectors were highly unusual. Carl's team proposed a kind of mood pairing. Who else is bummed out? Who doesn't give a shit? Who feels pretty good today? Maybe borderline ecstatic, even though something bad happened in Angola. Who's lost the taste of staying out late, wants to be alone and would like a silent partner in solitude? Who eats his daily caloric value in one sitting at 3 a.m. and has a special reaction to that? This wouldn't just be a dating service, even though ka-ching, hello, get paid, hashtag gritty times. They were pretty sure they were onto something. Cole thought that with enough users shooting their feelings into the cloud, Mayflower would be sitting on a goldmine of data. It was the ultimate privacy grab, better even than a blood sample from every living person on the planet, which the rumour sites also had the Mayflower company pursuing. But management smelled too much choice. The whole thing stank of opt-out. Self-knowledge was for the dead, they said. People don't like themselves enough to have to deal with other people with feelings similar to their own. It makes them feel less special. A product shouldn't be trying to tell the truth so aggressively. That was a turn-off. Besides, the feeling sensors weren't where they should be technology-wise, and only young people would want to wear the neck collars that Carl was proposing. So, this notion of people being surveyed and mined for their feelings, and then that forming a database in the cloud, because of course we live so much of our life online and in the cloud anyway. And then the horrible corporates selling that back to us as an original product, because we can't, we have no ownership of our own feelings. It's just, it's horrendous. It's, horrendous. And then the last sort of thing about that. So this is called The Trees of Sawtooth Park. And what this story is about is, again, it's another person being experimented on by doctors or medical technicians. So I'm going to read from it. What we were doing that year in St. Louis, it sounds odd to call it that, was tagging the major feelings, sub-tagging the minor ones. This was a mandate at Thompson Lord, the company where we died a little bit every day. Even on weekends when we didn't go to work, because it taunted us on the horizon, brown and long and suspiciously moist. More of an animal reared up on its hind legs than an office building, even though up close it resolved into brick and glass and was just another future pile of rubble for the end times. We were giving order to the interior weather system and whatnot, telling a story about our moods. The Thousand Shades of Disquiet was what we called it in the pale halls of Thompson. A system of classification for all the ways to feel. But because the names of feelings are just so unpleasant, destroyed forever by poets and shameless emoters, we swapped in animal names, bear and wolf and whatever. It was easier, a Noah's Ark of the possible tantrums, freakouts and moods. With such an approach we wouldn't box ourselves into some classification corner, or get lost in a subjective hell farm. And anyway, it was better to be on the same page with Dr. Nelson and his team, and the middle geeks at the Chem Lab, who had to conjure hormonal equivalents of these feelings using the arse glands of snakes and whatever. Again, this sort of artificial surrogate injections of feelings, because we've lost them, we've lost touch with them. And that, as I say, that is clearly the prevailing sort of idea of this collection of short stories. Now, I had the good fortune to see that Ben Marcus did a Q&A on Goodreads a few years ago. And this is obviously before this book had come out. And I said, given how you explode language, and particularly its syntax and function, do you think language is not fit for purpose, that it's a really bad communications tool? And he said, no, absolutely not. Completely the contrary. It's fantastic. Look at all the things you can write because of language. Now, although that put me in my place, that's still how I approach Ben Marcus, in that, for me, he points up language as slippery, elliptical, hard to pin down. Whereas he sees that as a strength. I see that as a weakness, but he sees it as a strength because it enables you to write anything. And what I think is going on here is actually, has he moved more in tune with my position? Because he's saying the one thing language certainly can't do is express emotion. That so many of these stories have to artificially construct emotion through chemicals, through sprays, through injections, through lotions. There's a story called Lotion. Because we humans are so out of sort of tune with it, part of which must come from language. I don't think language has ever been able to express emotion because there's no direct one-to-one between a word and an emotion in all its depth. Yes, you can say happy, sad, but you can use emoticons for that. Emotion is more subtle than that, and all emotion is also a feedback loop. Your thoughts are informed by your emotions, and as you think something through, that may impact back on your emotions. So it's constantly two-way feed. And I think Marcus has sort of, whether he'd admit that or not, I think he's sort of come round to that. He's no longer exploring the function and the grammar of language, but through these sort of rather startling, slightly estranged and alienating word choices and phrase choices, he's sort of saying, well, language doesn't do the job of expressing emotion. And so many of the characters here have to, battle and grasp and fumble towards it. Whereas other authorities are just sort of saying, well, we'll put it in a bottle and we'll inject it, or you can drink it, or you can smear it on your skin or whatever. It's a fantastic collection. It's divided into 4 parts. There's 13 stories in all. And I think is it 3? Yeah, so there's 3 short stories in section 1, starting with that one about the father and his son. And then you have Precious Precious and Blueprints for St. Louis, which I just think are tremendous stories. Then you have 4 stories in part 2, which are all good. Then in 3, you have 3 stories. The first 2 are very short, sort of 8-9 pages each, and they're great. And then I think you have the last one in 3 and the first one in 4. The last one in 3 is called Omen, and the first one in 4 is called Stay Down and Take It. I think they're the only 2 weak stories in the book. Omen is about a flood that forces an evacuation, whereas Stay Down and Take It is about sort of perpetual rain and driving through that, and a husband and a wife in a car also sort of evacuating themselves. It was a bit samey, and also it didn't have quite the sharp focus of it. But despite that, I'd give this 4.85. I would give it 5, but I did think those 2 stories were a bit slightly disappointing. It's called Notes from the Fog. The last story is called Notes from the Fog, but I don't think that's. I think for me that the fog is this chemical spray. It's those 2 architects knowing that the pharmaceutical companies are going to tender to see which of them can sell their spray for the mourners to pass through the mausoleum, the memorial. And to me, that is the fog. It is this artificially, externally squirted emotions, because we can no longer conjure them from the inside. So, a supreme book. I do have one gripe about it, though, I have to say. I don't know if this is going to show up here, but those pages are not cut flush. They do not, all have the same length or width, I suppose. And it made it really difficult turning a page over. Of course, because I've now turned every page, they're actually easier to turn. But for right or wrong, I don't turn at the corner. I normally turn in the middle. So, as you can see, I've tried to do it, and I've got 2 pages. And that happened to me time after time after time. So that every time I turned a page, I had to check the page number in the top left-hand corner to check I hadn't skipped a couple of pages. And I found that really infuriating, because it spoilt my natural momentum of the page, and as Marcus had written it. So Knopf, Alfred Knopf. You know, I don't know if this was just a bad, you know, a bad pressing or, you know, effectively a misprint, you know, typo of cutting, or whether this is deliberate, this sort of terracing thing. If anyone can tell me if that's an actual thing. But I was really annoyed by that, and, you know, must do better. If you look at the pages are flush, but here you can see they're all, you know, I don't know if that's the binding or the cutting. I suspect it's the cutting. So, you know, must do better on that, Knopf. But otherwise, you know, Ben Marcus, you know, up there with all his other books. And interestingly, as I say, I think he's slightly moved his sort of attack as a writer. So I'm very interested to see what he does next. I wonder if it will be a novel, and I wonder if it will be more of the order of this and less of the sort of really subversive sort of syntax and grammar of his earlier novels. Okay, thanks very much. Till next time.